Project definition and control points. Okay, so everything is set up. What's next? So as we mentioned earlier, we already defined the scope, we have the resources, we have the tool, we've already purchased a BPMS tool. We have to start working, okay? So the first thing we have to take into account is that in some cases our processes are already well documented, they're ready to be automated, and they're approved by management. So we have all the foundations to start. In other scenarios, in other cases, we don't have much material. Maybe it's obsolete, it's poorly structured. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that our information sources are reliable and that they're perfectly aligned with the company's objectives. This is very important. It's very important that we carry out a thorough analysis before the implementation, as this information is going to serve as the foundation for all the processes and all the features that we're going to start developing. So if the fundamental elements aren't right, the whole project could collapse. This is also something that happens to some companies who want to automate their processes. They actually have a lot of information, but this information is not useful anymore. Maybe someone wrote it 10 years ago, maybe it's not up to date, or sometimes they don't even have the documentation. They just, okay, they go working on a daily basis, but they don't no one really knows how all of this has to be done. Everyone knows how they have to do their job, but there's not someone who has the knowledge or enough knowledge to be able to transmit this knowledge into the system. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to have all this information. We have to input all this information into the system. So if we input information into the system based on wrong information, obviously this isn't going to be very helpful. So each project must have a document with detailed information on how the functionalities and activities involved in the project are going to work, whether they're manual or automatically performed. So let's say I have a process with a certain task. I need to know all the information related to the activity that someone has to perform. And I have to have it ready in order to input that information into the system. So in order to build this document, we're going to have to gather information. Obviously, if we don't have it already, there's some companies, when they start automating their processes, they already have everything perfectly documented and they have everything perfectly ready to get their processes automated and up and running in hardly no time. But for other companies who still haven't done this, let's say they haven't compiled the necessary information, they're going to have to go through this process first. So they're going to have to try to gather all the information they can. They can do this by talking to all the people that are affected by the different activities in a process, or even by analyzing the information they already have. Maybe they have information in databases, maybe they have information in a legacy tool, maybe their IT team has some information too. So they're going to have to do an internal analysis in order to gather enough information to be able to automate the process. So what we're going to have at the end, once we've gathered all this information, is a requirements document. It's going to contain the final diagrams of the process. This is something you're going to learn how to do during this course, how to create a diagram for a process. Usually it should also have a style guide. Okay, what's the look and feel we want our application to have? If our company's logo is red, we're probably not going to want color green and orange to appear everywhere. So usually we'd also create a style guide, or at least we'd add a few indications of what the look and feel should be like. Okay, so we already have the diagrams, we have the look and feel, and then we're going to start defining each activity that could be performed within the application. Okay, let's say it could be a task or a notification. If it's a task, we need, for example, the objective of the task, a brief description of what that person is going to perform in that task. A list of those involved or who's going to execute it. Okay, so is it going to be performed by one person, by a group of people, by a profile, maybe all the people who are blonde in the company? Okay, so we have to know who's going to be performing these activities. And let's imagine we're still talking about this task that someone has to perform. We need this person to be able to read or to be able to see enough information to carry out the activity. Maybe their documents, its data, fields, etc. instructions. And we also need to know what data he has to input into the system. Okay, so in order to carry out this activity, a brief description, who's going to be involved, what do they have to see in order to do their activity, what do they need to input in order to do this activity, and what would be the result, or what's going to happen after performing that activity. Maybe after that there's a decision where the flow is going to go in one or two or three different directions, depending on what this performer input into the system. So we also have to know what's going to happen after that. Here we have an example. You guys can download it when you access this presentation, where you can see a very, let's say, a easy to understand example of a requirements document. Okay, so once we have this document created with all the information we just mentioned, we want this document to be approved. Okay, so why do we say it's a functional document? Because it's actually a document that we can start implementing in a BPMS system. Okay, it's something we can work with. It has to be approved by the project directors. Okay, so whoever is in charge of the processes of the company has to approve that this is correct, this is what they want to achieve. And as it says here, it's highly recommended that they revise and review it during the creation process, not to leave it until the end, because maybe it's a large document with 50 pages or 500, I don't know, depending on the process, and they might want to chew it in smaller bites. In more complex projects, we also advise establishing control points or a project plan that can be carried out throughout the project. Okay, so this way we're going to be able to control the schedule, if the project is completed on time, how long did it take, the costs, like was it carried out with the estimated budget, how much money was spent, functionalities, does it actually deliver all that we expected, or does it not? What should we do in order to change this the next time? Do the results fulfill the company's expectations? To what extent? Okay, so if we do this, even though maybe we have a few mistakes in our first project, or we didn't take into account certain things, maybe it took a little bit longer to implement, or it took a little few more resources to implement, we can learn from our mistakes and we can improve the next time we're going to implement a new project.